At graduation, Dad texted, "Don't expect help." Then my CFO called about the IPO. "My name is Mila Thompson. I'm 27 years old, and this is my story." The applause felt like a wave hitting the shore. It was a sound I had only ever dreamed of. Bright lights warmed my face, and the weight of the graduation gown felt heavy on my shoulders. My name, Mila Thompson, echoed through the auditorium, spoken with a sense of importance I had never been given at home. I was on the stage at MIT, years after I should have been, finally collecting the degree I'd finished online while building my life. My eyes found my family in the front row. My father, George, sat stiffly in his tailored suit. My mother was beside him, a polite smile fixed on her face. My brothers, Mark and David, looked bored, their eyes scanning the crowd instead of looking at me. They were there, but they weren't really there. It was an act of obligation, not pride. Still, a small part of me felt a flicker of hope. Maybe seeing me up here, on this stage, would finally make them understand. Then my phone, tucked into the sleeve of my gown, buzzed. I glanced down, expecting a congratulatory message from a friend. Instead, I saw my dad's name. A cold feeling washed over me. He never texted. He called usually to issue a command or ask a question. A text felt different. It felt deliberate. I opened it. The words were few, but they were heavy enough to sink a ship. "Don't expect any help from me going forward. You're on your own." I read it once, then twice. The cheering from the crowd faded into a distant hum. The bright lights felt harsh and invasive. My heart, which had been soaring just moments before, plummeted. He chose this exact moment. The one moment that was supposed to be mine. He saw me succeeding on my own terms, and his reaction wasn't pride. It was a threat. A final cutting of a cord I didn't even know he was still holding. I felt the floor tilt beneath my feet. A wave of dizziness made me grip the podium for support. He had finally said it. The words that had been implied in every dismissive glance, in every condescending piece of advice, in every dollar he invested in my brothers, but not in me. "You are on your own." The message shattered me. For 5 seconds, the girl who had begged for his approval, the daughter who just wanted to fit, felt broken. The air left my lungs. Then my phone buzzed again. I almost ignored it. I couldn't handle another blow. But the name on the screen wasn't Dad. It was Lena, my CFO. Her calls were never casual. I stepped away from the podium, my hand trembling as I answered. "Mila?" Her voice was tight, electric with an energy I couldn't place. She wasn't congratulating me. This was business. "Lena, what's wrong?" I whispered, my voice barely a crackle. "Nothing's wrong," she said, and then she laughed, a sound of pure disbelief. "The IPO just priced. The final numbers are in." I held my breath. "Mila," she said, her voice shaking with emotion. What she said next didn't just change my world. It set it on fire. But before I tell you how everything flipped, like and subscribe, and drop a comment to let me know where you're watching from. I grew up in Austin, Texas, in a house that smelled of sawdust and ambition. My father, George Thompson, was the founder of Thompson Construction, a regional giant that built sprawling suburban neighborhoods, gleaming office parks, and the occasional high school stadium. He was a man who believed in things you could touch: concrete, steel, wood, and the solid weight of a signed contract. Our family life was built on this foundation. Dinner conversations were about zoning permits and supplier costs. Weekends were spent visiting construction sites, the air thick with the smell of wet dirt and the roar of heavy machinery. For my father, this wasn't just a business. It was a legacy, a kingdom he was building for his sons. My older brothers, Mark and David, were the heirs apparent. They were molded in our father's image from birth. They had miniature tool belts when they were toddlers and summer jobs on work crews as teenagers. Mark, the elder, had our father's ambition and sharp eye for a deal. David had his easy charm, the kind that could soothe an angry client or motivate a tired crew. They were loud, confident, and physical. Their world was one of tangible results. A foundation poured, a wall raised, a project completed. They spoke my father's language. I spoke a different language entirely. My world was silent, logical, and lived behind a screen. While they were learning to read blueprints, I was learning to read Python. The first computer I truly claimed was an old, clunky desktop my father had relegated to the home office. He used it for email. I discovered it was a portal to another universe. I spent countless hours in the local library, devouring books on programming, my mind lighting up with the elegance of code. I found a sense of order and creation in it that I couldn't find in the chaotic, muddy world of construction. My attempts to bridge our two worlds were always a failure. I remember being 12 and spending a month creating a simple inventory management program for the thousands of tools and parts the company had in its main warehouse. I designed a simple interface, created a database, and even made a logo. I thought he would be impressed by the initiative, by the way I had applied my skills to his world. I waited for him after dinner one night, my heart pounding with a mix of excitement and anxiety. "Dad, can I show you something?" I asked, opening my laptop on the heavy oak dining table. He glanced over, a tired but indulgent smile on his face. "What is it, sweetheart?" I launched the program, explaining how it could track everything, reduce loss, and save time. "You could put a barcode scanner on everything and—" He cut me off, not unkindly, but with a finality that crushed me. He placed his large, calloused hand over mine on the mousepad. "Mila, this is very clever. You're a smart girl," he said, the words a familiar, hollow praise. He then turned to Mark, who was lounging in a nearby chair. "Mark, be ready at 6 tomorrow morning. We're going to the Henderson site. I want you to see how the framing crew works." The message was clear. My work was clever. Mark's work was real. My contribution was a little project to be patted on the head for. His was an education in the family business. I quietly closed the laptop. The glow of the screen vanished, and I was left sitting in the shadows of my brother's bright futures. My mother was a silent accomplice in this dynamic. She was a kind woman, but she navigated our family by never making waves. Her domain was the house, the social calendar, the smooth running of our domestic lives. When the men talked business, she would gently guide me toward her world. "Mila, come help me with dessert," she'd say, steering me away from the blueprints and into the kitchen. Her love was a cage of quiet expectations. Be polite, be supportive, be invisible. She was teaching me the roles she had perfected, the woman in the background. As we got older, the divide deepened. My brothers were given responsibilities, trust, and respect. I was given chores. They were taught to lead. I was taught to support them. This meant helping them with their homework, typing their school papers, and organizing their schedules. I was the family's unpaid administrative assistant, a role everyone assumed I was happy to fill. I did it because I craved any form of validation, any small nod of approval. If I couldn't be a builder like them, maybe I could be useful. But usefulness is not the same as being valued. I saw it in the small things. When my brothers got their driver's licenses, they were given keys to one of the company trucks. When I got mine, I was given lectures about insurance costs and told to ask for permission to use my mother's minivan. When they talked about their futures, a dealership for Mark, a chain of gyms for David, my father would listen intently, offering advice and connections. When I talked about wanting to study computer science at a top-tier university, he would laugh. "Tech? That's just a hobby, Mila," he said one night, the phrase a constant refrain in my life. "It's a bubble. It's not real. Real business builds something you can touch, something that will be standing long after you're gone." I looked down at my hands. They were not calloused like his or my brother's. They were smooth, the fingers nimble from years spent on a keyboard. He was right. The worlds I built were invisible, made of logic and light, existing only on a screen. To him, they were no more real than a daydream. But I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that my invisible worlds were just as powerful as his concrete ones. He couldn't see it, but I could. And his inability to see me, to understand the world I was so passionate about, didn't make me want to give up. It forged a quiet, steely resolve inside of me. I would stop trying to get him to look at my world. Instead, I would build one so massive, so powerful, and so undeniably real that he would have no choice but to see. I would build something that could stand without his approval, without his support, and without his name. The summer I turned 18 was thick with the Texas heat and the heavy sense of an ending. High school was over, and the future felt like a vast, uncharted territory. For my brothers, the map was already drawn and handed to them by our father. For me, it felt like I was being given a blank sheet of paper and told to find my own way, with no tools and no guide. The final, undeniable proof of this came on a sweltering evening in June, in the one room of the house that was my father's sacred space, his study. The weeks leading up to that night had been filled with a low hum of excitement for Mark and David. Their graduation gifts weren't just parties or new cars, they were conversations. Closed-door meetings with my father, hushed phone calls with his accountant, and dinners with his business associates. They were being initiated into the world of men, and I was on the outside looking in. I tried to focus on my own future. I had been accepted into MIT with a partial scholarship. It was a huge achievement, one I was immensely proud of, but in my family, it was treated as a strange and expensive eccentricity. Boston is so far away, my mother would say with a worried sigh, and so cold. I had even spent weeks refining an idea that had been forming in my mind for months. A secure, user-friendly data encryption service for small businesses. I wrote a 20-page business plan, complete with market analysis, potential revenue streams, and a development timeline. I thought that if I presented my passion in a language he understood, the language of business, he would finally take me seriously. I was naive. I still believed there was a key that could unlock his approval. That night, he called us into his study. The room was his fortress, paneled in dark wood and smelling of old leather and cigar smoke. Diplomas and awards lined the walls, each one a testament to his success. A large, framed photograph of him shaking the governor's hand hung directly behind his massive oak desk. It was a room designed to make you feel small. We sat in the stiff leather chairs facing him. My mother stood near the bookshelf, a silent sentinel. My father leaned back, a benevolent, kingly smile on his face. He looked at my brothers, his chest swelling with a pride so thick it felt like another presence in the room. "Boys," he began, his voice a low rumble, "you've worked hard. You've finished school. You are Thompson men, and it's time you start building your own legacies." He spoke at length about the value of hard work, of taking risks, of the grit it took to make something from nothing, even though they were starting with everything. Then came the ceremony. He slid 2 thick, cream-colored envelopes across the polished surface of the desk. "Mark, David, this is for you, a starter fund. $50,000 each, an investment from me to you, to give you a foundation to build on." Mark, ever the pragmatist, opened his immediately, a low whistle escaping his lips as he saw the check. He was going to start a high-end used car dealership. David, more laid back, just grinned and pocketed the envelope. His dream was a chain of fitness centers. My father beamed, watching the sons who would carry his legacy forward. I sat there, my hands cold in my lap. My own business plan felt heavy and foolish in my bag. I waited. The silence stretched. He had to have something for me, I thought. Maybe not the same, but something. A smaller amount. An offer to connect me with someone in the tech industry. Anything to show that he saw my future as a valid one. The silence continued. He stood up, ready to end the meeting and slap his sons on the back in celebration. My voice, when I finally found it, was thin and shaky. "What about me?" The celebratory mood in the room instantly evaporated. All eyes turned to me. My father looked genuinely startled, as if a piece of furniture had just spoken. "What do you mean, Mila?" he asked, his brow furrowed in confusion. "The starter fund," I said, my voice gaining a fragile strength. "Is there one for me?" A short, sharp laugh escaped his lips before he could stop it. It was a sound of pure disbelief. He sat back down, leaning forward and steepling his fingers, adopting the patient tone he used when explaining adult concepts to a child. "Mila, honey, this is an investment in a tangible business. Something real. Your brothers are building companies here in Austin. They're putting down roots." My face burned with humiliation, but I pushed on. I had to try. "I have a business plan," I said, my voice trembling as I reached into my bag. "It's a tech company, Data Halo. It's for data security. I've done the research. The market is—" He held up a hand, a gesture that silenced me more effectively than a shout. He didn't even look at my proposal. "That's wonderful, dear. You've always been so creative with those computers," he said, the compliment feeling like a razor blade wrapped in cotton. "But that's a different world. It's a gamble on an idea. I invest in assets, in property, in things that have weight and substance." Then, he delivered the line that would sever the last thread of hope I had. He tried to frame it as a solution, a helpful suggestion. "You're so smart and organized," he said, his voice softening with what he probably thought was kindness. "You're great with numbers and spreadsheets. When Mark and David get their businesses off the ground, they're going to need someone they can trust to handle the books. You could be a real asset to them. You can help them succeed." The air in my lungs turned to ice. It wasn't just a no. It was a complete redefinition of my future. He didn't just deny my dream. He demoted me to a supporting character in my brother's dreams. My ambition wasn't to be invested in. It was to be redirected into their service. I wasn't a potential CEO. I was a future bookkeeper, the assistant they would never have to pay. I looked at my mother, a desperate, silent plea in my eyes. "Say something, please." She looked back at me, her face a mask of pained sympathy, and then she looked away, down at her hands. Her silence was my answer. She would not challenge him. She would not stand up for me. In this kingdom, the king's word was law, and my role had just been assigned. Slowly, I stood up. The leather of the chair groaned in the quiet room. I didn't cry. I didn't argue. A strange cold calm washed over me. The fight had gone out of me, replaced by a terrible, liberating clarity. I finally understood. I would never win this battle. I would never get his approval, because he wasn't capable of seeing me as anything more than what he had already decided I was. Okay, I said, my voice devoid of all emotion. I understand now. I turned and walked out of the study, leaving my business plan in my bag. I could feel their eyes on my back. As I walked up the stairs to my bedroom, I could hear my father's booming laugh return, followed by the excited chatter of my brothers. They were already planning their futures, spending their money, building their legacies on the foundation he had given them. I closed my bedroom door and leaned against it. I didn't turn on the light. I sat in the darkness, listening to the sounds of the family I no longer belonged to. I wasn't a Thompson in the way my brothers were. I was an accessory. And on that night, I decided I was done being an accessory. I would not be their bookkeeper. I would not be their assistant. I would go to MIT, and I would build my own foundation, not of concrete and steel, but of ones and zeros. And I would build it completely, utterly, and proudly on my own. Leaving for MIT felt less like going to college and more like escaping a sinking ship. The goodbye at the Austin airport was brief and sterile. My father gave me a firm, businesslike handshake and a single piece of advice. Work hard, but don't get your head stuck in the clouds. My mother hugged me, her embrace tight with unspoken anxieties. My brothers clapped me on the shoulder, their minds already on the grand openings of their new businesses. There were no tears, no emotional farewells. It felt like they were seeing off a distant cousin. I boarded the plane with 2 suitcases, a laptop, and a student loan debt that felt like a mountain. But for the first time in my life, I felt light. The reality of my new life hit me as hard as the cold Boston air. My dorm room was a tiny, sterile box with cinder-block walls and a window that faced a perpetually gray courtyard. It was a stark contrast to my spacious, comfortable room in Austin. The freedom I craved came with a price tag I hadn't fully comprehended. The partial scholarship covered a good chunk of my tuition, but books, food, and living expenses were entirely on me. While other students called home for extra cash, I juggled a work-study job in the library, a weekend waitressing gig at a diner that always smelled of grease, and a full course load at one of the most demanding universities in the world. My life became a relentless grind. My days were a blur of lectures on data structures, shelving books in the hushed quiet of the library, and serving coffee to tired students. My nights were spent in the glow of my laptop, fueled by instant noodles and the cheapest coffee I could find. Sleep was a commodity I couldn't afford. I was constantly exhausted. A dull ache settled deep in my bones. I saw the easy camaraderie of other students, the late-night pizza runs, the weekend trips, the care packages from home, and felt a profound sense of isolation. I was a ghost haunting the edges of campus life, too busy surviving to truly participate. The weekly phone calls with my father were a special kind of torture. He would ask about my classes with feigned interest before quickly moving on to the real news. Mark's dealership had exceeded its quarterly sales target. David was scouting a location for his second gym. His voice would be filled with pride, a warmth he never used when talking about my pursuits. "How's that little computer project of yours going?" he'd ask, his term for my entire field of study. "It's going well," I'd say, my voice flat. I never told him about my struggles. I never mentioned the looming rent payment, or the fact that I'd eaten ramen for 5 straight days. His sympathy would have felt like pity, and his help would have felt like a leash. Admitting I was struggling would have been admitting he was right. "That's good," he'd say, his tone dismissive. "Just remember that desk at the family office is always waiting for you." Mark could really use someone smart to handle his accounts. It was his constant refrain, his safety net that felt more like a cage. He wasn't offering me a lifeline. He was waiting for me to fail. That constant, low-grade dismissal became the engine that drove me. His doubt was a whetstone, and I sharpened my ambition on it every day. The idea for Data Halo, the one I had tried to pitch to him, became my obsession. It was more than a project. It was my proof of life. I poured every spare moment and every ounce of energy into it. I wrote thousands of lines of code in my tiny dorm room, the click-clack of the keyboard my only companion late into the night. When I finally had a working prototype, I felt a surge of triumph. This was it. This was something real. I used what little money I had saved to print business cards and buy one good blazer from a thrift store. Then, I started pitching. The rejections were swift and brutal. I was a 19-year-old girl trying to sell a cybersecurity product in a world dominated by men twice my age. I would walk into sleek, intimidating boardrooms, my heart pounding in my chest. I'd deliver my carefully rehearsed pitch, and they would look at me with a mixture of amusement and condescension. I'll never forget one meeting with a venture capital firm. The man I pitched to, a silver-haired executive named Mr. Davies, listened with a polite, bored expression. When I finished, he steepled his fingers and gave me a paternal smile. "Very impressive, little lady," he said, the words making my skin crawl. "You've clearly put a lot of work into this, but cybersecurity is a shark tank. You need millions in backing and a team of seasoned executives. You've got a good head on your shoulders. Maybe think about getting a job at a company like ours first. Learn the ropes." He was showing me the door before I had even sat down. I walked out of that building into the drizzling Boston rain, the humiliation a hot, bitter taste in my mouth. That was my 10th rejection. 10 times I had poured my heart out, and 10 times I had been patted on the head and told to go play somewhere else. I found a bench in a small park, sat down in the cold rain, and let the tears I had been holding back for months finally fall. I felt utterly defeated. My father's voice echoed in my head. "Come home. You're in over your head." I sat there for what felt like an hour, letting the despair wash over me. I was so tired of fighting. Maybe he was right. Maybe I was just a girl with a hobby. But then something else surfaced. A flicker of anger, a stubborn spark of defiance. I thought of Mr. Davies calling me little lady. I thought of my father's condescending offers. I thought of my brothers and their $50,000 head start. The anger burned away the despair, leaving a hard, cold resolve in its place. I was not done. I would not let them win. I pulled out my phone, my fingers numb and clumsy from the cold. I had one more meeting scheduled, a long shot with a small independent investor I knew little about. I almost canceled it. But I thought one more, just one more. The office was small, nothing like the glass towers I had been visiting. The investor was a woman named Sarah Chen. She didn't wear a suit. She listened to my pitch without interruption, her eyes sharp and intelligent. When I was done, she didn't smile or offer condescending praise. She asked me hard questions. About my code, about my scaling strategy, about my competitors. It was a real conversation, a grilling from one professional to another. At the end, she leaned back in her chair and was quiet for a long moment. "Your business plan is a mess," she said bluntly, "but your tech is solid. And you've got more grit than any 10 founders I've met this year." She opened her checkbook. "I can't give you much," she said, "but I can give you $10,000. It's enough to get you off the ground. Don't waste it." I stared at the check, at the numbers written in neat, clear ink. It wasn't just money. It was validation. It was the first time someone had looked at my dream and seen a real investment. That $10,000 felt like more than the $100,000 my father had given my brothers. Theirs was an inheritance. This was earned. I walked out of her office not into rain, but into a future that was finally, tangibly, my own. Sarah Chen's $10,000 felt like $1 million. It wasn't enough to hire a team or rent a fancy office, but it was enough to buy legitimacy. I immediately incorporated Data Halo, bought a dedicated server so I was no longer running everything off my laptop, and rented the smallest, cheapest office space I could find, a windowless room in the back of a shared workspace that was probably a former supply closet. The rent was cheap, and more importantly, it was a place that wasn't my dorm room. It was a place of business. The money, however, also brought a new kind of pressure. The clock was ticking. I was burning through my seed funding with every passing day. I was still the sole employee, handling the coding, the marketing, the accounting, everything. I was drowning in work, and the loneliness was crushing. The armor I had built from my family's rejection and the VC's dismissals was strong, but it was also heavy and isolating. I knew, with a terrifying certainty, that I couldn't do this alone. I needed a partner, someone who could see what I saw and fight alongside me. I found her at a Women in Tech Mixer, an event I almost didn't go to. I was exhausted, and the idea of making small talk felt draining, but I forced myself to go. I was standing awkwardly in a corner, nursing a glass of sparkling water, when a woman with sharp eyes and an even sharper black pantsuit approached me. "You're Mila Thompson, right? Data Halo?" she said, her voice direct and devoid of pleasantries. "I saw your company file for incorporation. I looked up your pitch deck." "I am," I said cautiously. "I'm Lena, and your business model is going to fail," she stated, not cruelly, but as a matter of fact. My heart sank. I braced for another lecture. "However," she continued, a small smile playing on her lips, "your core technology is one of the most brilliant things I've seen in years. You're an architect who doesn't know how to build a house." Her bluntness was like a splash of cold water. It was the most honest feedback I had received from anyone. Lena, I learned, was a recent business school graduate working 60-hour weeks at a prestigious Boston investment firm. She was brilliant, ambitious, and suffocating in a corporate culture where her male colleagues constantly took credit for her work. She was looking for a way out, a place where her skills would be valued, not stolen. We left the mixer and went to a nearby coffee shop where we talked for 3 hours. It felt like my brain was firing on all cylinders for the first time. I explained the intricacies of my encryption algorithm, and she listened, asking intelligent questions. Then, she took a napkin and sketched out a completely new business strategy, a tiered subscription model, a B2B enterprise focus instead of my scattershot small business approach, and a clear roadmap for scaling. She saw the potential I saw, but she also saw the path to get there, a path I had been blind to. By the end of the night, I made a bold move. "Quit your job," I said. "Come work with me. I can't pay you what you're making now. In fact, I can barely pay you anything, but I'll give you equity. We can build this together." A week later, she walked into my tiny closet of an office, carrying a box with her belongings. She had quit her 6-figure job to become the co-founder and CFO of a company with less than $5,000 in the bank. She was either crazy, or she believed in me and Data Halo as much as I did. Lena's arrival transformed everything. We were a 2-woman army. She was the pragmatist to my visionary. While I refined and expanded the code, she built the business around it. She created professional financial projections, a sleek marketing kit, and a target list of potential clients. She taught me how to speak the language of investors and executives, how to turn my technical passion into a value proposition. In return, I taught her the fundamentals of cybersecurity, empowering her to speak about our product with as much authority as I did. Our partnership was forged in the crucible of rejection. The bias we faced as a team was somehow more overt than what I had faced alone. We would walk into meetings, and potential investors would direct all the technical questions to me and all the financial questions to an imaginary man who wasn't in the room. They would talk down to us, calling our ambition cute and our projections optimistic. The most memorable was a meeting with a well-known VC, the one who had called me Little Lady months before. This time I had Lena with me. He didn't seem to remember me. He listened to our polished pitch, a smirk playing on his lips the entire time. "So," he said, leaning back in his chair, a picture of smug authority. "Let me get this straight. The little lady who builds the code and the numbers girl think you can take on a billion-dollar industry?" Before I could even react, Lena leaned forward, her gaze as sharp as steel. "We're not a little lady and a numbers girl," she said, her voice dangerously calm. "We are the CEO and CFO of a company that has developed a more efficient and secure encryption platform than anything your portfolio companies are currently using. The question isn't whether we can take on this industry. The question is whether you're smart enough to get in on the ground floor before we make you and your portfolio look obsolete." We didn't get his money, but we walked out of that office feeling 10 feet tall. That shared experience, that righteous fury, bonded us more than any success could have. We decided right then to change our strategy. No more begging VCs for money. We would prove our value through our work. We would land one major client. That goal consumed us. We worked around the clock, surviving on coffee and adrenaline. We sent out hundreds of targeted emails and made just as many cold calls. The rejections piled up. "We already have a security provider. You're too small. It's too risky. We don't work with startups." Our bank account was dwindling. The pressure was suffocating. There were days when I was so consumed by doubt that I could barely breathe. But I had Lena. When I was ready to give up, she was the one who would push forward. When she was exhausted, I would find a new gear. Finally, we got a nibble. A mid-level IT director at a Fortune 500 logistics company named Frank. He was intrigued by our technology. He was fighting his own battles with the slow, outdated, and ridiculously expensive security software his company was using. He couldn't get his superiors to listen to him, so he offered us a small, under-the-radar pilot program, secure one of his departments for 1 month. If we could reduce their security breaches, he would have the data to argue for us. It was our one shot. We treated that pilot program like it was the most important contract in the world. We were relentless. We provided 24/7 support. We anticipated issues before they arose. We created custom solutions for their specific vulnerabilities. For 30 days, we barely slept. We lived and breathed that company's data security. On the last day of the pilot, we waited by the phone, our nerves completely frayed. The entire future of Data Halo rested on this one call. When the phone finally rang, I answered it on speaker, my hand shaking. "Mila? It's Frank," he said. "Hi, Frank. How did everything go?" Lena asked, her voice impossibly steady. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Then we heard him let out a long breath. "I don't know what kind of magic you two are running over there," he said, a note of awe in his voice. "But my department, which is usually the leakiest ship in the company, has had 0 security incidents for 30 days. 0. My boss is stunned. His boss is asking questions. They want to know who you are? They want to talk about a company-wide contract for all of North America." Lena and I looked at each other across our tiny, cluttered office. We didn't shout. We didn't cheer. A slow, wide smile spread across Lena's face, and tears of pure, unadulterated relief began to stream down my cheeks. We had done it. Against all odds, we had landed our whale. We weren't just a spark anymore. We were a fire. That first Fortune 500 contract wasn't just a victory. It was a key. It unlocked a door into a world I had only read about. Suddenly, Data Halo wasn't a risky startup anymore. We were a validated enterprise solution. The industry buzz started as a whisper and grew into a steady hum. Other companies who had previously ignored our calls started reaching out to us. The logistics company became our case study, our proof that the torpedo Lena had spoken of could actually sink a battleship's worth of problems. The 2 years that followed were a blur of relentless, exhilarating work. We moved out of the janitor's closet and into a real office in Boston's tech hub. It was a modest space at first, with second-hand desks and a coffee machine we bought on sale. But it felt like a palace. We hired our first employees. A brilliant young coder named Sam, who could see vulnerabilities in systems no one else could, and a sharp, tireless head of sales named Maria, who believed in our product with an almost religious fervor. Lena and I went from being a duo to leading a team. Our growth was explosive. Within 18 months, we had a roster of 24 major clients, including a national bank and a healthcare provider. Our revenue wasn't just growing, it was multiplying. The name Data Halo started appearing in tech journals and business blogs. We were celebrated for our innovative approach and our lean, aggressive business model. I started getting invitations to speak on panels about cybersecurity and female entrepreneurship. I was becoming a name in my industry, a world so completely removed from my family's that it might as well have been on another planet. Throughout this entire meteoric rise, I maintained a strict policy of silence with my family. I kept them completely and utterly out of the loop. My weekly phone calls with my father continued, but they became an exercise in careful evasion. The conversations were a strange dance around the truth. "So, how is that little computer job going?" he would ask, the condescension still present in his voice, though now tinged with a faint curiosity. He imagined I had a 9-to-5 job in a cubicle somewhere. "It's going well, Dad," I'd reply, my voice even and calm as I stared out the window of my corner office, which overlooked the Boston skyline. "We're keeping busy." "Good, good. Are you managing to pay your rent?" he'd ask, his tone implying that this was the highest measure of success he could imagine for me. "Yes, I'm managing," I'd say, thinking of the new apartment I'd just bought, a spacious loft in a converted warehouse that I adored. He would then launch into a lengthy update on my brothers. Mark had just acquired a second dealership and was looking into a third. David's gym franchise was expanding into the next state. He spoke of their achievements in granular detail, the square footage of their new properties, the number of employees they'd hired, the local newspaper articles that had been written about them. He was so proud. He would send me the clippings in the mail, circles of red ink highlighting their names. I would look at the blurry photos of them cutting ribbons with giant scissors and feel a strange, hollow ache. They were the real, tangible success stories of the Thompson family. I was the distant, vaguely employed daughter with a computer job. I never corrected him. I never sent him links to the articles about Data Halo. I never mentioned that my little job now employed 50 people. I never told him that the company I founded was valued at 50, then 100, then $400 million. Part of it was self-preservation. I didn't want his criticism or his unsolicited advice. I didn't want him to try and claim a piece of my success, or worse, dismiss it as a fluke. But another part of me was running a long, quiet experiment. I wanted to see how long it would take for my world to become so big that it would finally appear on his radar. I wanted them to find out the way strangers would, not from a proud daughter's phone call, but from a headline they couldn't ignore. My mother was the only one who seemed to sense that something was different. "You sound tired, Mila," she'd say, her voice laced with concern. "Are you working too hard? You should come home for a visit. Your brother David's son is walking now." Her attempts to connect were always through the lens of the family I had left behind. She couldn't ask about my life because she had no frame of reference for it. A CEO of a tech company wasn't a role she knew how to place me in. A daughter, an aunt, Those were roles she understood. The decision to finally finish my degree was almost an afterthought. I had a few credits left and had been finishing them online, slowly, whenever I had a spare moment. When MIT notified me that I was eligible to participate in the graduation ceremony, I initially planned to ignore it. I didn't need a piece of paper to validate what I had built. Data Halo was my real diploma. But then an idea began to form. The ceremony was a public event. It was a stage. It was the perfect stage. It represented the very thing my father had dismissed, the fantasy of my education, the world of ideas he thought was worthless. To accept my diploma on that stage in front of him felt like the perfect, quiet closing of a circle. So, out of a courtesy that felt more like a strategic move, I invited them. I sent a formal printed invitation to their home in Austin. I booked their flights and a suite at a fancy hotel in Cambridge. I would give them a front row seat to the life they had never bothered to ask about. A week before the ceremony, my mother called. "We're all so excited to come, Mila," she said. "Your father even bought a new suit. We're so proud you're finally finishing your degree." The irony was thick enough to taste. They were proud of the one achievement that now meant the least to me. They had no idea they were flying 2,000 miles to attend the epilogue of a story they had never even read. They came, dressed like royalty visiting the provinces, ready to watch their daughter get her little diploma before she returned to her little life. They had no idea they were about to witness a coronation. The day of the graduation was bright and unseasonably warm for Boston. The campus was buzzing with an infectious energy, a sea of black gowns and beaming families. I found my own family near the entrance to the main auditorium. They stood out, even in the massive crowd. My father wore his new suit like armor, his posture rigid and imposing. My mother looked elegant but anxious, clutching her purse with both hands. My brothers, Mark and David, looked like they'd rather be anywhere else, already checking their phones for updates on their respective businesses. The greeting was awkward. My mother hugged me tightly, whispering, "You look so smart in your gown, honey." My father gave me a stiff, one-armed hug and a curt nod. "Mila, good to see you're finally getting this done." His words weren't cruel, but they were heavy with the implication that this was a box being belatedly checked, a task long overdue. My brothers offered quick, distracted hugs before their attention returned to their screens. I led them to their reserved seats in the front row, a prime location I had arranged. As they settled in, I felt a familiar pang of loneliness. I watched other graduates laughing with their parents, accepting corsages, their family's pride a warm, tangible thing. My family was there, but they were separate, observing the proceedings like spectators at a sporting event for which they didn't know the rules. Just before I had to leave them to line up with the other graduates, a moment of weakness struck me. Maybe I should tell them. Maybe I should just say, "Dad, the company. It's about to go public." Maybe this was my last chance to connect with them, to let them in. But then I saw the look on my father's face. He was scanning the crowd, his expression a mixture of boredom and impatience. He caught my eye and gave me a small, tight smile. It was the same smile he'd given me in his study all those years ago. Patient, condescending, a smile that said, "Let's get this over with." And in that moment, my resolve hardened. No, I would not give him the satisfaction of knowing before the rest of the world. He would learn about it the same way everyone else did. I excused myself and went to find my place in the procession. The wait backstage was a blur of nervous chatter and last-minute adjustments to caps and gowns. I felt strangely calm, detached from the excitement around me. My mind was on the IPO. Lena was in New York with our bankers, finalizing the opening price. She had promised to call the second she had news. Every buzz of my phone made my heart leap. As we began to file into the auditorium, I saw an email pop up on my phone. It was from a reporter at a major tech publication, one who had been following our company for months. The subject line was, "Request for comment, Data Halo IPO." Attached was a draft of the article they were planning to publish the moment the stock market opened. I scanned the first paragraph. It mentioned my name, MIT, and a rumored valuation that was already staggering. A knot of anxiety tightened in my stomach. The news was starting to leak. The public story was about to break. We took our seats. The ceremony began. Speeches were made. Names were called. My leg bounced nervously under my gown. I kept my phone in my hand, hidden from view, my thumb hovering over Lena's contact. Minutes before my group was scheduled to walk, my phone buzzed. It was a text. My heart hammered against my ribs. This is it. It's Lena. But it wasn't. The name on the screen was Dad. A cold dread washed over me. He never, ever texted. I opened the message, my hands suddenly clammy. The words were stark on the small screen. Don't expect any help from me going forward. You're on your own." The world tilted. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. The timing was surgical. It was a calculated strike, designed to wound. I looked toward the front row. He was looking right at me, his face a mask of cold disapproval. He must have seen something. Maybe a friend in the business world had texted him. Maybe he had seen one of the early speculative news alerts on his own phone. He had seen a hint of my success, a success I had hidden from him, and his reaction wasn't pride. It was fury. It was the ultimate punishment from a man whose ego couldn't handle his daughter building an empire without his name, his money, or his permission. His message wasn't about my future. It was about my perceived betrayal. "How dare you succeed without me?" The words hit me like a physical blow, knocking the wind out of me. All the old hurts, all the years of feeling invisible and undervalued, came rushing back. The confident CEO I had become vanished, and for a few agonizing seconds, I was that little girl in his study again, begging for him to see me. Tears pricked at the corners of my eyes. He had found a way to tarnish my biggest moment, to turn my triumph into another reminder that I would never be enough for him. I was about to shatter. Then, my phone buzzed again, a frantic, insistent vibration. I looked down, my vision blurry. It was Lena. I fumbled to answer the call, turning away and pressing the phone hard against my ear, trying to block out the dean's speech droning on from the podium. "Mila." Lena's voice was high-pitched, strained, and breathless. "Lena, what's wrong?" I whispered, my voice ragged. My mind immediately went to the worst-case scenario. The IPO had failed. The market had rejected us. She let out a wild, hysterical laugh. "Wrong? Nothing is wrong. Everything is more right than we ever could have imagined. The IPO priced, Mila. It priced at the absolute top of the range. The demand was insane." She took a deep, shuddering breath. "The market just opened. I'm watching the ticker right now. It's soaring." "What? What are the numbers, Lena?" I asked, my voice barely audible. I could hear frantic shouting and cheering in the background on her end of the line. She was on the trading floor. "The initial valuation was $900 million, she said, her voice shaking with disbelief. "As of 10 seconds ago, Mila, our market cap just crossed $1.3 billion. 1.3. With a B, you're not just a CEO anymore. You're officially a unicorn CEO." The two messages, received just minutes apart, collided in my brain. "You're on your own. You're a unicorn CEO." My father's attempt to cut me down, to isolate me, was answered by the roar of the world validating me on a scale I could barely comprehend. His petty personal rejection was eclipsed by a massive public acceptance. The tears in my eyes weren't tears of hurt anymore. They were tears of overwhelming, shocking, dizzying triumph. His words no longer had any power. He had tried to push me off a cliff, not knowing I had already grown wings. Mila Thompson, my name was being called. It was my turn to walk the stage. Hearing my name being called felt like waking from a dream. The world snapped back into focus, but the landscape had changed entirely. Just moments before, I had been reeling from my father's emotional body blow. Now, Lena's words were echoing in my head. 1.3 billion, a number so vast it seemed unreal. A strange, almost surreal calm settled over me. The chaos of the past few minutes coalesced into a single sharp point of clarity. I stood up, my legs feeling both heavy and light at the same time. The applause for my name was a distant, muffled sound. My entire universe had contracted to two objects: the diploma I was about to receive in one hand, and the phone I was still clutching in the other. One represented the past he had dismissed. The other held the future he could not deny. As I began the walk across the stage, everything seemed to move in slow motion. I was intensely aware of every detail: the heat of the stage lights, the smooth fabric of my gown, the faces in the crowd turning to watch me. My gaze, however, was locked on one person: my father. He was sitting in the front row, a perfect vantage point. He wasn't looking at me. His head was down, his attention focused on his own phone. He must have been seeing the same news alerts that were now exploding across the financial world. The initial rumors that had provoked his angry text were now being confirmed by a tidal wave of official reports. I watched him as I walked. I saw the subtle shift in his posture. He straightened up, his back going rigid. He lifted his head, his eyes wide. I saw the color physically drain from his face. His jaw, which was usually set in a firm, confident line, went slack with disbelief. On his face was the naked, unguarded shock of a man whose entire understanding of the world had just been shattered. He was reading the headlines. He was seeing my name, Mila Thompson, next to a number with 9 zeros. At that exact moment, I reached the center of the stage. The dean of the university, a kind-faced older man, smiled warmly and extended his hand, holding my diploma. I turned to face the crowd, to face my father. I took the diploma, my fingers closing around the rolled-up parchment. Our eyes met. For the first time in my life, he couldn't look away. There was no condescending smile, no dismissive glance. There was only raw, unfiltered shock. In his eyes, I saw it all. The confusion, the dawning realization, the flicker of what might have been regret. The daughter he had written off, the girl with the hobby, the one he had just declared, was on her own, was standing on a stage being honored for her education while the world was simultaneously honoring her for building an empire. I held his gaze as I shook the dean's hand. The applause from the crowd swelled, a wave of anonymous approval, but the only thing I could hear was the deafening silence between me and my father. In that silence, everything was said. All the years of being underestimated, of being told my dreams were invalid, of being relegated to the sidelines of my own family, it all culminated in this one, silent, public moment of reckoning. He had built his kingdom of concrete and steel, but my invisible world of code had just been valued at more than his entire life's work. A photographer's flash went off, capturing the moment forever. Me, holding my diploma, my expression calm and steady, and in the background, a man in the front row staring up at the stage as if he'd just seen a ghost. As I walked off the stage, my heart wasn't pounding with anger or glee. I didn't feel a rush of vengeful satisfaction. I just felt a profound sense of finality. The power dynamic had irrevocably shifted. The game was over, and the rules had been rewritten. The little girl who had once desperately craved his approval had been replaced by a woman who no longer needed it. I found my seat among the other graduates, the diploma feeling cool and solid in my hands. I risked one last glance at my family. My mother was staring at me, her hand over her mouth, her eyes filled with a confusing mix of pride and fear. My brothers were no longer looking bored. They were whispering furiously to each other, their faces pale with shock as they scrolled through their phones. And my father, he was just sitting there, motionless, staring at the empty spot on the stage where I had just stood. He looked smaller than I had ever seen him. The rest of the ceremony passed in a blur. More names were called, more speeches were made, but I heard none of it. I was in my own world, a world that had been fundamentally and permanently altered in the space of 10 minutes. My father had sent a text to put me in my place, but the universe, it seemed, had sent a reply. After the ceremony ended, the auditorium erupted into a chaotic, joyous celebration. Graduates were hugging their families, cameras were flashing, and the air was thick with the scent of relief and bright futures. I was immediately surrounded by a few of my professors and classmates, all offering their congratulations on my degree. But their words were quickly drowned out by a new, more urgent wave of attention. Phones were buzzing everywhere. My face, which had been on the giant screen on stage just moments before, was now on thousands of smaller screens in the room. The news of the Data Halo IPO was spreading like wildfire. "Mila, is it true?" a former classmate asked, his eyes wide as he showed me the headline on his phone. $1 billion? I just smiled and nodded, feeling a strange sense of detachment from the frenzy. Lena was already calling me, her voice a happy whirlwind of updates. "The Wall Street Journal wants a quote. Forbes is running a feature. Mila, are you there? We're the biggest tech IPO of the year." I navigated through the throng, trying to find a quiet corner. But before I could, I saw my family making their way toward me. They moved like a single, hesitant unit, the crowd parting around them. The usual air of command that surrounded my father was gone. He looked uncertain, his steps slow. My mother and brothers trailed behind him, their faces a mixture of awe and apprehension. They looked like strangers who had come to see a monument, only to find out it was built by their own estranged daughter. My father stopped a few feet in front of me. He was holding his phone in his hand as if it were a piece of foreign evidence. His eyes, which had always been so sure, so dismissive, were now filled with a deep, unsettling confusion. The noise of the crowd seemed to fade away, creating a small pocket of intense silence around us. He cleared his throat, his voice uneven, rough with an emotion I couldn't name. "The IPO, the company, it's yours?" he asked, the question sounding absurd even as he said it. "Yes," I said, my voice soft but steady. He stared at my face, searching for something. For the little girl he recognized perhaps. He didn't find her. He looked down at his phone again, then back at me. Finally, he said the words that proved he still didn't understand. "You could have told me." It wasn't an apology. It was an accusation. An accusation that I had hidden this from him, that I had excluded him from my success. All the pain and anger I had suppressed for years could have boiled over in that moment. I could have screamed. I could have listed every dismissal, every condescending remark, every dollar he had invested in my brothers but not in me. I could have thrown his own text message back in his face, but I didn't. The calm that had settled over me on stage was still there. I looked him directly in the eye, not with anger, but with a simple, devastating clarity. "You told me I was on my own," I said, my voice quiet but carrying more weight than a shout ever could. "So I believed you." The words hung in the air between us. They were his words, not mine. I was simply returning them to him. He had no response. His mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out. The certainty that had defined his entire life, the bedrock of his authority, crumbled in that moment. He had built his world on the principle that he was the architect, the one who gave permission, the one who laid the foundations. My success was a testament to a world built without him, and he had no idea how to exist in it. The silence that stretched between us was his answer. It was the apology he could never say, the regret he could never voice. It was the sound of his world being irrevocably altered by a daughter he had never truly seen. My mother finally stepped forward, tears welling in her eyes. "Oh, Mila," she whispered, pulling me into a hug. It was a hug filled with years of unspoken words, a mixture of pride and a deep, sorrowful regret for her own silence. My brothers just stood there, looking at me with a new, unnerving kind of respect. I was no longer just their little sister. I was a force they couldn't comprehend. That night, after the awkward and mostly silent dinner my family and I shared, I went back to my hotel room. Lena had arranged for a small celebration with our Boston-based team. But before I went, I sat down at my laptop and made a phone call to my lawyer and my new financial advisor. The next morning, Data Halo issued a press release. It announced the formation of the Halo Grant, a multi-million-dollar mentorship fund dedicated to supporting young female entrepreneurs in the tech space. The fund was specifically designed for those who were starting with nothing more than a laptop and a dream. The dedication, which I wrote myself, was simple. For every daughter who was told it was just a hobby, for every woman who was told to leave it to the men, for every dreamer who was denied a starter fund, this is for you. Build without permission. It was my quiet revenge. It wasn't about tearing my father down. It was about building others up. It was about taking the pain of my past and transforming it into fuel for someone else's future. That felt more powerful than any argument I could ever win, any "I told you so" I could ever deliver. I had taken the silence he had given me and turned it into a resounding message of hope that would echo far beyond the walls of our family. Today, things are different. The dust from the IPO has settled into a new reality. Data Halo is a leader in the cybersecurity industry, a public company that protects the data of millions of people worldwide. My life is a whirlwind of board meetings, product launches, and keynote speeches. It's a world away from the girl who survived on instant noodles in a tiny dorm room. My relationship with my family has changed, too. It's not the warm, reconciled relationship you might see in a movie. It's quieter, more complicated than that. My father tells people he's proud of me. I hear it from distant relatives, from his business associates. He keeps newspaper clippings about me now, not about my brothers. He frames the articles from Forbes and the Wall Street Journal and hangs them in his study, right next to the photo of him with the governor. He tries to talk to me about market caps and stock prices, awkwardly attempting to speak my language. Maybe he is proud. Or maybe he's proud of the reflection of his name in my success. I've come to realize that it doesn't matter anymore. I spent so many years starving for his approval that I didn't realize when I had stopped needing it. The validation I get from my work, from my team, and from the young women we fund through the Halo Grant is more fulfilling than his ever could have been. I didn't need his help to succeed. I just needed his doubt to light the fire. The girl who once begged for a $50,000 starter fund now runs a company that decides how to invest millions. The peace I have is on my own terms, built on a foundation of my own making. If you've ever been doubted by family, if you've ever been told your dream was just a hobby, hit like, subscribe, and tell me where you're watching from. This one's for every dreamer who heard no and built anyway.